Aloha, this is Canonical, the podcast that takes literature out of the classroom. I'm James Shao, and with me are my co-hosts, Iad Darris and Sam Spieler.
Aloha to you.
You guys are giving people the impression that this is a much sunnier podcast than it really is.
Well, I thought we needed to bring some sunshine to this episode, since we are reviewing Satantango, that's how I'm pronouncing it, by László Krasznahorkai, and that's how I'm pronouncing that. The second book in our series on Life Under Communism. We previously reviewed and discussed Herta Muller's The Passport, and the last book in our series will be The Garlic Ballads by Muller. If you would like to find us online, we are on social media at Canonical Pod and on Reddit at rCanonicalPod.
Also, if you are very interested in seeing how beautiful we are, you can check us on YouTube, where we have some clips from these episodes, and you can see Sam's handsome face.
Yeah. What's the YouTube channel? Is it Pale and Paler? All right, so let's talk about Satantango. I'm going to pronounce it differently every time. This time it's Satantango. Sam, you picked Satantango. Why did you pick this book for our series?
Well, this book came as a suggestion from one of our listeners via our subreddit. And when I started looking into books for a series that I wanted to do on communism, this felt like a natural place to start.
This suggestion was a while ago, right?
Yeah. And I don't remember the person's name.
I hope he's still waiting.
I hope so, too. Yeah, I'll reach out to them. I did look that comment up. It was from like 7 months ago. And that, as far as I could tell, was like the last thing that person posted. So who knows what happened? But I'll reach out to them.
We care about our listeners, but like...
we're just very slow.
Yeah, we care about 7 months delay worth.
Deadbeat father mode.
Hey, we came back with the cigarettes in hand. So anyway, I was immediately curious about a book that seems to be about the ills of collectivism, yet, according to its author, is not political in any way. I wanted to know how that could possibly be, especially contrasted against another idea that we've discussed in the past, which is that all art is political in some fashion. I'm also interested in watching, at some point, the 7-hour film by Ballads that was adapted from this.
It's a good first date movie.
I have seen it, actually. It is good, but it's totally different.
Really?
I think the experience is totally different.
Oh, sure.
All right, so László Krasznahorkai, the writer, is perhaps Hungary's most well-known literary writer. Agree? Name me another one.
He's hot. He's having a moment now.
Well, he's having a decade, I think.
For us, yeah, he's as hot as can be.
His books are typically described as bleak, dystopian, and difficult to read. I agree with that. That's what Wikipedia tells me, since I've only read the one book of his. Have you guys read other books by him?
No.
I haven't, but he has been on my radar for a while. I was actually interested in checking him out.
No, this was the first I'd heard of him.
So, like, you've got a lot of books on your radar, Ed. At this point, it's like a scatter plot, right? Like, your radar's like a circle. It's a colored-in circle.
You look at the keywords, bleak, difficult to read, unentertaining. It's got Iad all over it. Like, obviously, it's on my radar.
Yeah, that's like your LinkedIn profile.
It's my dating profile.
Speaking of Wikipedia, I don't know if you guys saw his photo on Wikipedia. It's a great photo. It's sort of like a Van Gogh look. He's an interesting guy. I did a bit of reading, listened to some of his interviews. I won't say he's pretentious, but he's kind of self-important and kind of given to cryptic proclamations. Like, for example, quote, "The full stop doesn't belong to human beings. It belongs to God." I don't know what you can make with that. Like, if you're some interviewer and he gives that to you, you're just like, all right. Moving on.
You got your pull quote.
I might pull out some of his quotes later. There's some gems in there, but yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
You just move on to the next, I guess.
Because, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say he's pretentious, because pretentious kind of implies he thinks he's more important than he actually is. I think he is actually important. But when you drop something like that in an interview or a conversation, you're just like, all right, okay. Many of his books are set in Hungary, like Satantango, his debut novel. But the one that caught my eye was Destruction and Sorrow Beneath the Heavens, which was set in China and informed by his travels in the country. Did you come across this yet?
I read about that. I think his wife is a pretty well-known China watcher. So I think that he follows her around when she does her academic studies in China.
Is a China watcher like Sarah Palin watching Russia from her house? What does it mean when she's a China watcher?
You're one of these people that they call up on the TV station to give a comment about what China's doing, or like, this is what it means when China talks about Double 11, or whatever it is that Western people don't understand about China.
I'm pretty interested in this book. It's kind of about Chinese history, but also about China today. So that's on my list, my much less populated radar. So he's written quite a few books, and he's won a number of awards, including the Man Booker International Prize, the National Book Award, and the most prestigious award of all, dun 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 dun. Which one is it? The 2018 Literature.gr's Phrase of the Year. We have a second Phrase of the Year winner. In 2018, he won the Phrase of the Year.
Remind me, who was the first Phrase of the Year? The one that we talked about before.
Yes. Okay. Let me explain this. If you don't know what this award is, it's a Greek award given out annually to the Phrase of the Year. No definition. That's just what it is. All right.
Okay.
We previously encountered it when we read Anthony Marra's The Tsar of Love and Techno. Now, I had thought that this award was given out to recent or new publications, okay? Because Anthony Marra won it for that year. But Satantango won the Phrase of the Year in 2018. Now, the book was published in 1985, translated into English in 2012, and according to Ask Jeeves, translated into Greek in 2015. 2018, 3 years later, I guess they got around to reading it.
We're on a 7-month delay. They're on a 3-year delay.
3 years. And they're only reading phrases, mind you. So
I was going to ask, apparently the answer is no. Before you said that it was for Satantango, I was going to ask if it was for one of his more recent books that apparently has like a 314-page sentence.
Sam, they are never going to give an award to to anything more than a page. This is a Phrase of the Year award, Sam. You're asking them to read a book?
I don't know what they mean by a phrase. That could be anything.
So, like I said, I don't know what the criteria for this award is now. You might say it's all Greek. If you're interested in reading more about this prize, just go to, it's a multi-step process. You got to go to Ask Jeeves. It's now known as ask.com. All right. Search for literature.gr and Satantango. Spell it however you like. Jeeves will figure it out. You'll also want to install a Google Translate extension, okay? Because the site is in Greek. It's a Greek site, okay? That's important. Otherwise, you won't understand anything. All right. Now, what I want to do is we can do one of two games. The first is guess the winning phrase. Or the second, we could do who wrote it best. Which one are you guys more interested in? Guess the correct winning phrase or who wrote it best?
What do you mean, who wrote it best?
It's like who wore it best.
Yeah.
I'm guessing who wrote it best will be more fun. I can't imagine two writers writing the same exact phrase.
All right. Who wrote it best? Anthony Marra, 2016. In what prayer does the last human not die alone? Or László Krasznahorkai, 1985, 2012, 2015, or 2018, whichever one you prefer. Sorry, hold on. It's a long one.
See, I knew it.
saw as in a vision the progress of spring, summer, fall, and winter, as if the whole of time were a frivolous interlude in the much greater spaces of eternity, a brilliant conjuring trick to produce something apparently orderly out of chaos, to establish a vantage point from which chance might begin to look like necessity. Who wrote it best?
Ooh.
I don't even think that's the best quote from the book, like by far. I remember
Sam,
that
maybe
one.
you're not understanding the quote. Do I need to read it again for you?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I actually disagree with you because I noted this, and this was before I
I
realized
noted it
won.
too, but I think it's a good quote, but I don't think it's the best.
Let's say it's stretching the limits of a phrase. It's like a 2-3 line phrase, but you don't think it's the best phrase of the book? What do you think is the best phrase of the book, Sam?
I don't have one specifically picked out or anything, but there were a number that I noted down. Like there's one I think in that same chapter that is incredibly long. It's a whole page of a sentence.
Well, these Greek judges did not read that sentence, Sam.
Right.
This is not a full sentence, by the way. It is a part of the sentence, thereby qualifying it as a phrase. All right, who wrote it best?
Gotta be Mara. When you're going for a phrase, it has to sound good first. I don't think that Mara's meaning is particularly interesting, but it sounds better.
Well, and if the whole point of a phrase, at least to my mind, is pithiness, then I think you have to give it to Mara.
Yeah, Krasznahorkai winning this really begets a whole host of problems and questions about this award. I think, personally, it delegitimizes the award. That's how far I'm willing to go. That's my judgment.
Before it was fine, but now all bets are off.
I wondered, why did they award this in 2018? That was the COVID year, because they awarded it the year after, so 2019, COVID-19, put it together. So they actually didn't have an award ceremony for this, unfortunately, so we couldn't see Van Gogh receive this award. That made me wonder, like, maybe it was COVID related, you know? They were stuck at home, they were kind of depressed, and they're like, man, what do I read when I'm depressed? Krasznahorkai. Boom. Fitting for 2019, awarded for 2018, published in 1985. So anyway, literature.gr. It's a good award, and I'm looking forward to the third book, Sam, that you will pick from their award-winning list. Because Mara was also your pick. So
you figured out my code. Dang.
You know, you got to trust those Greek judges.
It hasn't failed me so far.
Okay, let's talk about Satantango. As I mentioned, it's László Krasznahorkai's debut novel, published in 1985, translated by George Zertes. That's how I'm pronouncing it. Is that how you guys pronounce it? Zertes?
I would assume so. I've actually never pronounced it.
Me neither.
Yeah, I prefer Zertes to George Zertes. It's just weird.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Zertes. All right. Translated by George Zertes in 2012. Here's the main plot of the novel. The con man or agent of the state called Iremius returns to an estate, which I understood as kind of a village. Is that how you guys understood the word estate in this book?
Yeah.
And he persuades 8 of the people who live there to give him money and leave with him. That's the plot of the book. There's a lot that surround him going to the village and the 8 characters, and there are other characters in the story. They interact with each other, they have affairs, they lust after each other, but essentially that's the plot of the book. The other handful of characters who live on the estate, they're also kind of important, and I'd say the most important is the subplot where there's a child who commits suicide. Would you guys agree that this is probably the other plot point in the book that's kind of important?
I think the novel is kind of a wheel, and the suicide of the child is the axle around which the wheel turns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of the emotional climax.
When you're reading this book, what stands out is the style. The book has 12 chapters with mirroring halves. Each chapter, with a few exceptions, is an unbroken paragraph, and Krasznahorkai writes in very long sentences. His translator calls his work a slow lava flow of narrative, a vast black river of type. This was interesting to pair with The Passport, the last book we read for the series, because The Passport is also bleak, also from Central Europe, but it's opposite. Like The Passport, we talked about how it was really short, had very short sentences and very short chapters. So just, interesting to think about.
This book, it reminded me of the Lime Works. Even though I feel like there are similarities between this and that, this is an easier book to read. I don't think this is an easy book. It's not dense in the way that that book is dense. It's dense in its own way.
We're going to talk more about the style in an upcoming episode, but I do think that, Krasznahorkai is part of a genealogy of European writing, and I think that Bernhard is a bit further upstream, but I don't think that it's by accident that you're seeing the similarity.
Well, let's talk about what we thought about this book.
Well, I mean, you guys know this is an Iyad book, so you know I'm going to like it.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you would have liked The Passport, but you didn't like The Passport as much. So my Iyad radar is off now.
I like this book a lot when you read it, even if you don't particularly enjoy reading it. You can clearly see there's something in it that's a beyond, that is just like this sign that there is real artistic intention and real high-level thinking about craft and high-level thinking about his subject matter. And that to me is really compelling. I think on the broadest level, the subject matter is the futility of our lives and the futility of trying to make forward progress from one place to another. I think that is the central theme of the novel, and I think it's also the central organizing principle of the whole thing.
Yet, would you like to guess how Sam or I felt about this book? Because as you alluded to it, we know you will love this book, or we suspected you would anyway.
I think, in fact, the both of you liked it, but probably less than I did. So if I'm hovering maybe, let's say, 8 out of 10, you, James, are probably like 6, 7 out of 10, and Sam is probably like 7 as well.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
Sam in the middle, of course.
Well,
He's
I don't
of
know.
two minds about this. Don't forget,
No,
2
I'm
minds.
I'm not of 2 minds. I did enjoy it. I had to match the rhythm of the narrative. At the beginning, I kept finding reasons to put it down. I think you need to keep with a certain pace to move forward, or at least I did. And once I established that pace, I could start to dig in more and actually enjoy what was happening and enjoy the kind of ridiculous sentence structures that he has. But this is not my normal cup of tea.
Well, it's like what Xerxes said. It's not a cup of tea, it's a cup of lava.
Right. It's got that slow burn. Yeah.
I mean, are you generally an optimist? Because I think that sensibility is really important in how you react to this. And I think that you, Sam, definitely are a bit too chipper for this kind of bleakness.
I don't know that that is the issue. I think I have plenty of bleakness in me, and I think I share a lot of the sense of futility that this book has, but I'm of 2 minds when it comes to that optimism and pessimism. This speaks to my pessimism, so that's not the issue. The issue for me is the style. The style is what I needed to really get into line with.
I had exactly the same response as you, Sam, and almost exactly the same, I'd say, reading process, in that it was so difficult for me in the first 2 chapters. I think the first 2 chapters, it took up like 2 weeks because I did not want to read it. I was like, oh my God, this is like pulling teeth. What actually helped me was I just looked up a synopsis. And after I read it, I was like, oh, okay, that's what is happening here. Because I said before, I don't think the plot's that important, but I kept on feeling that I was going to miss something when I was reading it. Like I kept on thinking, is this important? Is this important? Do I need to keep track of what is happening here? And then when I read the synopsis, I was like, oh, no, I don't. Like, I just need to generally understand, like, they're moving from point A to point B. And I was able to get into that rhythm you were talking about, where I actually really like the sentences. I think a lot of credit should go to the translator. I mean, he won the award for best translated work of 2012 or 2013. So George Surtees, I think, is a really good translator because I think the language in the book is amazing, actually. So once I could get into that rhythm, I actually very much enjoyed the book.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
I don't disagree that it's a challenge. And what I was saying earlier about sensibility is that you have to see some payoff because you see it and it just looks like work and it looks like a difficult read. And if that kind of pessimistic, bleak perspective doesn't resonate with you personally, what's going to motivate you to keep going? Like if you're not doing a podcast, if you're not doing schoolwork, and you just encounter this book and it's just like, oh man, this is really harshing my vibe. I'm just Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky and I've got this really difficult book about bleakness in Soviet Europe. What's the point?
Well, there is some humor in this book, which is something that you had mentioned about our last book as lacking.
Right.
That would have been a much better book had it had more humor to it and not just a flat bleakness. But the humor that we see in this book, in Satantango, is, to me, kind of akin to that same Central European humor that we saw from Bernhard, where there's humor, but it's not funny.
Well, that chapter about those clerks translating, that was funny. A little bit put on, but it was funny.
Well, see, that's how I felt about a lot of the humor throughout the book, is that it feels kind of slapsticky or put on. There is humor, but maybe it just generally wasn't for me.
I think instead of even humor, I would say what makes it interesting is it's deliberately an exaggeration. It's not realism. It's not attempting realism. When you see things happen in the novel, it's an exaggeration. It's something that has a grain of truth in it, but it's amplified to the nth degree. And then the point is, well, why is this being amplified? What does the amplification do? It points to an absurdity.
What makes it difficult, like we mentioned before, was very long sentences, no paragraph breaks, but also the beginnings and the scenes, like it does have multiple scenes in a chapter, they just drop you in the middle. Like it is in media res taken to the extreme. You don't know who the characters are. Even though they might have been introduced earlier, you don't know who the character is in the scene that Krasznahorkai transitions to. And you kind of have to figure out, like, oh, this is the youngest daughter of this family of 4 kids. And I know that because it mentions that she has a brother. And 2 chapters ago, we know that these 2 ladies have a younger brother and a younger sister. Like, you have to put that together.
Sometimes it's not even clear who's talking.
Yeah, that's what makes it frustrating because, you always have this question like, okay, why are you doing it? Like, why purposefully obscure this part of storytelling? But like I said, once I got used to it, I was fine. But getting used to that is really difficult because it's so annoying to just be dropped in the middle of something and then to feel like, well, I don't really know who this character is or what's happening in the scene, and I don't know if it's important. For me, what helped was reading the synopsis. So that helped me get over that mental barrier. And for me, it was not at all about the bleakness, because I don't care about the bleakness. It was that difficulty of understanding the logistics of the book.
Yeah, he definitely seems to intentionally frustrate the reader and frustrate your idea of clarity and not meaning per se, because I do think there is meaning, but a lot of that structural frustration points to the futility that Iad was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, when I say that it's the organizing principle of the novel, it really, I think, becomes clear if you compare it to The Passport, like you were doing earlier, where The Passport is all short sentences, it's short vignettes, the whole book is like 90 pages long. Everywhere you look in that novel, you see a way out and a way in. You can start and stop reading very easily. You can find yourself inside of the story, not inside of the world, but inside of the story, very easy. With this novel, it's very difficult to find your way into it, and it's very difficult to find your way out of it. So it places you, in one respect, in a very similar situation like these characters, where you're in a situation that is unpleasant and there's no way out. You might think there's a way out, but it proves to be useless.
I came across this quote about Krasznahorkai in the New Yorker magazine. The article is titled Madness and Civilization. So in the New Yorker article by James Wood, he says, in Krasznahorkai, we often have no idea what is motivating the fictions. Reading him is a little like seeing a group of people standing in a circle in a town square, apparently warming their hands at a fire, only to discover as one gets closer that there is no fire and that they are gathered around nothing at all. I like that. I think is similar to what you're saying, Ed, right? About what his fiction is like.
Hmm.
I did see that quote somewhere. I really like that.
I mentioned briefly the plot of the book earlier. Do you think the plot is important to this book?
I think what matters to me in my reading is that it's enigmatic. I think if it were clear, it would defeat a bit of the futility that I think is so important. Like if it were clear what Eremias was doing and who he worked for and why he was doing what he did, it would be a much more straightforward affair, wouldn't it? It would be much less like the futility of life.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. There are very few things that become clear as the book goes on, to the point that there are things you get hints about in the first couple chapters. Some of those things are answered and clarified. A lot of them are not. And I think that goes to that futility of trying to understand everything that's happening around you when there isn't really necessarily a guiding principle or anything.
So, the reason why I'm asking this question is I agree with you guys, but, and this is where I will sort of spoil the book. So, I guess if you don't want the book spoiled, just fast forward like 2 minutes or whatever. He takes these people, these 8 people, out of their village or estate, and he takes their money. He brings them to another place and he assigns work to them and sends them to different places to do their work. Now, this is very clearly an allegory for communism and central planning. As we talked about, this book is not really that kind of book.
I think that it has something to say about human beings, and it says something about collectivism incidentally. So I think when Krasznahorkai goes on the record and says this book is not about, communism or socialism, I think he's kind of being misleading because it is, but it's about that only in the sense that he's using it to talk about something much larger.
And that something larger is the futility of life.
I think, yeah, it's the inability for human beings to change because of what human beings are at their core.
Yeah, he seems to have a real problem with people in general. In an interview, I will talk about in the next episode, someone asks him about the structure of the novel and the mirror quality, and whether that quality plus the doctor has something to do with the problems of not being able to forget. And Krasznahorkai's response is, I'm going to shorten this a little bit, but everything is of equal interest in the world except man himself. When I stand on top of a mountain and look down on the valley, seeing the trees in the distance, the deer, the horses, and the stream below, then look up at the sky, the clouds, and the birds. It is all perfect and magical, right up to the moment that, suddenly and brutally, a human being walks into view. The spectacle I was enjoying from the mountaintop is simply ruined.
Wait, are you quoting Iad here?
And then he goes on to talk about sort of how that relates to this question and to this book. But it is so perfectly anti-human. Yeah, I love it.
So this book was a sensation when it was translated into English and published in 2012. And also, I guess, when it was translated into Greek 3 years later, it was also a sensation. In a Guardian article titled, "Why is New York's Literary Crowd Suddenly Enthralled to Hungarian Fiction?" Long title, could be better. Author Hari Kunzru described how popular the book was, especially among the New York literati. He says, "There is also a sense, I'm paraphrasing, at least among the minority who can raise their heads from a visit from the Goon Squad for long enough to remember the existence of the non-Anglophone literary world, that for all the action there's something middlebrow about much of the work that is being hailed as evidence of a New York or, God forbid, a Brooklyn literary renaissance. This is a milieu that, for every Don DeLillo whose apocalypse mastery is undeniable, produces several Jonathan Franzens, who I believe you just read recently, Iad, or Chad Harbach's conservative stylists, whose technical gifts are harnessed to a kind of domestic realism, which eschews metaphysical or existential flights in favor of pragmatic, reader-friendly observation. It is a kind of triangulation between the demands of the critics and the market that feels, to many, less ambitious and confrontational than the work being made elsewhere in the world." So, what do you think about this assessment of American literature?
I mean, is he saying something about American literature or something about American people? Because I would hazard that everything that he's saying about the tastes of American authors stems from the tastes of American people. And the Americans who bother to read European lit on the level of Krasznahorkai are of a very small subset of American readers, and it's a very self-selected sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong necessarily, but it does seem like a chicken or egg kind of thing. Like, do you blame the writer or do you blame the readers?
What I'm curious about also is he is saying that, a writer like Jonathan Franzen writes the way he does in order to cater to the market. And that, to me, I think feels a little bit unfair. I think that there is a case, an artistic case, to be made for writing that kind of realist fiction. And it's not just this is what will sell and this is what people can understand.
I think you could understand it not as the market dictating the product or as the writer leading the market, but rather both parts are reflecting what Americans are thinking about and want to consume. Like, it is two sides of a coin. I don't think it's really like a chicken or egg thing for me. It's more of the fact that writers are writing about this because this is what American writers are concerned with, but it's also what Americans want to read because it's what Americans are concerned with. So I don't see one leading the other. I see it as being a fundamental difference in taste and aesthetics between the American audience and I guess in this case, the Central European audience. Our shared experiences are different, right? This kind of bleakness that we talked about earlier in the podcast episode, the bleakness is something that Americans didn't encounter because they didn't have to live under communism and the fall of communism.
You could say that, but you could also say that the experience itself is not the important ingredient that makes it a valuable work. It's the statement that's being made about humanity in general. And getting to that idea requires talk of communism, but it doesn't have to come from communism. It could be communism, it could be some other experience.
There's definitely something different. I mean, it's hard to compare Jonathan Franzen with Krasznahorkai, but I guess that's the point, that we don't see a lot of this kind of metaphysical or existential flight, as he puts it, in American literature. And I guess an easy thing to point to would be the wars and political issues that have plagued Europe for, the last century. But that also feels very simplistic to just say the experiences are driving that, and that's all.
There is a pervasive sort of idea in all of the arts that Americans are often late to the party, very slow on the uptake. But you could say we're not late to the party. We don't want to go to that party in the first place. But there are some people in the US, probably myself included, who are interested in this and who want access to this kind of content. And to that respect, yeah, I'm one of these people who establishes a bad reputation for all Americans by reading this, in 2012 or even much later than that when it was published in Europe in 1985.
This points back to the discussion we had around Stoner also, that took, a series of French readers for it to be popularized here where it was originally published many decades later.
Another thing that I think we have to reckon with in this conversation is if we're talking about a difference between a Franzen typewriter and a Krasznahorkai typewriter, is one actually better or more skilled or whatever than the other? Like, can Franzen write a book like Satantango? Can Krasznahorkai write a book like The Corrections or like Crossroads? I don't know if it's really something that you could say exists in a hierarchy, but there is this kind of subtle dig that I think's going on in Kunzra's remarks, where he's saying, Americans want the easy thing.
I think that's definitely what he's saying. I don't think it's that subtle.
Is it true then? Is there something that a realist writer can't do? Like, could Franzen write this novel? I would say probably not, but I really don't know if Krasznahorkai could also be bothered to, just get his mind together and focus on a character and focus on his prose style for long enough to write something like what Franzen has done.
I feel like it's not just about what's in their wheelhouse. I think it also is just not what they're interested in. I don't want to throw my hands up and say, it's okay for everyone to write different things, but that's kind of how you get varied writing, right? Demanding that everyone write the book that Krasznahorkai writes. I don't think I want to live there either.
All right, let's conclude here. Thank you for listening. If we were way out of bounds with our review of this book, you can let us know on Reddit or on social media at CanonicalPod. If you found this podcast interesting, you can give us a review on Apple or your podcast platform of choice. Next week, we will be back with an in-depth discussion of this novel. If you want to join that discussion, you probably want to read the book first. So go get a copy of this book and budget about 2 weeks for our episode next week. Till next time, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.